Arirang Special.
The long trip to Washington is now at an end.
I am the last person who will really spending time in the palace. People should know as a history.
It's taken a long time to get here. Her name is Lee Hae-kyung, the last princess of the Korean Empire. This place holds a special meaning for her, recovering a legacy from her grandfather 100 years past. The location of the Korean Empire's old Legation building, where sad memories and aspirations of a monarchy long gone. What happened here over a century ago? For Americans in the 21st century, Korea is not an all too isolated country. But it was a lot less familiar in the 19th century, where outsiders had zero access to Korea. No one could have imagined that such reclusive royalty would live in America. When it first began relations with America, Korea was called Joseon, a country with a strong closed-door policy. However, it was 1883. Joseon had then opted for change. The land of the morning calm woke from its silence of 500 years and sent Pobingsa to America. The first ever diplomatic visit to the U.S. was comprised of the highest-ranking officials and intellectuals. Departing from Incheon, then the only open port, and passing through Yokohama, they finally arrived in San Francisco. And with a visit to America, Joseon began its first exchange with the West. The ambassador leading the Pobingsa group was the Empress's nephew, Min Young-ik. September 15, 1883. Starting in San Francisco, Min Young-ik and Pobingsa went cross-country by train and arrived in Washington, D.C. The delegation then traveled on to New York City, where the U.S. President was visiting at the time, and 4 days later, on September 18th, formally presented themselves at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. The mysterious Asian stranger's first visit to America. An historic moment for a country whose doors were tightly shut. Joseon actively ventured out into the world. At a time when powerful nations made weaker ones their colonies, they began to show interest in Joseon. During that time, the people of Joseon did not leave far from the birthplaces. Parents passed on their tradecraft to their sons and daughters, and continued on with their centuries-old traditions and lifestyles. However, the tides of imperialism were headed towards the agricultural nation of Joseon. Joseon had no choice but to change. They too recognized that fact. Yet the problem was that everything happened before they could fully prepare themselves. (1876), Japan invaded Kanghwa Island. And with the signing of the unequal Kanghwa Treaty, Joseon was forced into having an open-door policy. Seven years prior to the first Bobingsa delegation's visit to the West was the beginnings of Joseon trying to survive amidst the great powers. The then King Gojong desired to establish relations with the West in hopes of developing Joseon. He was more than eager to accept Western culture.
고종은 아버지가 쇄국 정책이라는 걸 했잖아요. 그래서는 나라가 우리 조선이 망하고 만다. 지금 서양의 이 가지고 있는 기술 문명이라는 것이 우리 조선과 청나라가 가지고 있는 것에 비해서는 몇 배나 우수한 건데 그걸 지금 당장 받아들여서 우리 걸로 만들지 않으면은 우린 정말 망한다. 그러니까 문호를 개방하고 빨리 그 문명을 새로운 문명을 받아들여야 된다. 그런 각도에서 말하자면 개방 선진 문명 수용 정책을 취합니다.
While there was a clash between those who wanted the status quo versus those who embraced a new culture and change, there was continued development and active diplomacy.
From 1882, when Joseon and the U.S. established diplomatic relations, the Koreans were very interested in learning from the West. They sent a so-called gentleman's mission to many countries, China, Japan, Europe, but particularly the United States. They sent a large delegation to the U.S. to see what was going on there, to learn about this country which they knew almost nothing about, to set up a legation in the 1880s, and then finally succeeding in 1890, and to be recognized and respected by the U.S. as an equally sovereign country. And they were quite successful. They were welcomed with a great deal of curiosity and interest by Americans when they traveled there.
고종의 그 대외 정책에서 그 서양 나라들과 그 수교하는 데서 가장 중요시했던 나라가 미국이었어요. 그래서 서양 나라 중에는 제일 첫 번째로 수호 통상 조약을 체결합니다. 그런데 그 82년 4월 달에 체결했는데 청나라가 방해를 했죠. 그래서 공사를 바로 못 보냅니다. 87년에서야 그 박정양 씨가 이제 그 스태프들 데리고서 갑니다.
Diplomatic relations with the U.S. was that first step. November 12, 1887, Joseon's first American envoy, Pak Jong-young, was sent to the U.S. Though a treaty of friendship was exchanged, things didn't go smoothly. Like the frustrated first diplomat's fate, the first legation, the Fisher House has since gone away, only to become a parking lot.
영약 3단을 이행하라. 그 영약 3단이 뭐냐? 말하면은 조선공사가 워싱턴에 부임하게 되면은 반드시 주미 청국공사를 방문해서 주미 청국공사의 안내와 지시를 받아서 국무부로 방문할 거. 자주회기를 벌리니까 그 당시 주미 청나라 공사 장음한이가 마구 왜 영약 3단을 지키지 않느냐, 응? 마구 이렇게 따집니다. 따지고 또 그러니까 결국은 원세계가 소환을 해버려요. 그러니까 주미공사로 특명공사로 갔던 박장희가 1년도 못해 돌아옵니다. 소환합니다.
However, Gojong remained undaunted. Joseon was able to ward off the Qing dynasty and Japan's advances 4 years later in 1891. Gojong issued instructions for a legation to be purchased in Washington. The legation in America was established to prevent any nation from interfering with internal Joseon matters and symbolized Joseon's independence.
고종은 미국을 통한 근대화, 이걸 굉장히 강하게 추구를 했습니다. 그런 의미에서 그 주미공사관은 대단히 큰 의미를 가지고 있습니다. 한국 근대사에서. 또 고종이 또 그걸 자기의 내탄금 가지고 직접 샀습니다. 그걸. 그냥 그 근대화의 방향이 어떻다는 걸 여기서 알 수가 있고요.
Gojong's efforts did not end here. In 1897, Gojong declared Joseon to be an empire, thus becoming emperor, declaring Joseon as the Korean Empire and accelerated reforms. Joseon, now governed by the emperor, became the Korean Empire. Reforms started from the top. Western-style buildings were constructed on royal palace grounds, and the planning of a modern capital, Seoul, commenced. A full-scale implementation of electricity, telephone communication, and the like actively began. And proclaiming its neutrality, national efforts for enhancing prosperity, a strong military, and an independent foreign policy continued.
고종은 그 서양 나라들 7개, 7개국과 그 조약을 체결했습니다. 그리고 이 아시아, 동아시아에서는 중국, 일본, 그래서 9개 나라와 조약을 체결했는데 그 목표는 이 영세 중립국으로 가는 겁니다. 그러니까 지정학적으로는 대단히 여러 나라가 이용하려고 그러고, 그러나 나라는 큰 나라가 아니란 말이죠.
Yet the situation surrounding Joseon, which now had become the Korean Empire, was not ideal. Turning back the clock about 2 years' time, the Korean peninsula became a battleground for other countries. The Qing dynasty, which had suppressed Joseon for a long time, and Japan, which had just begun intimidating Joseon. These two countries fought for supremacy over the Korean peninsula and clashed, and upon pushing out the Qing dynasty, Japan actively expanded its influence and power. The Korean Empire struggled to resist. In order to stop Japan's tyranny, the monarchy established diplomatic relations with Russia. And as Japan was forced into a corner, plans for a terrible scheme began. The assassination of the Empress was that very horrific plot. Japanese diplomat Miura ordered his gangsters to invade Gyeongbok Palace and brutally stabbed Empress Myeongsong to death. However, the Japanese government did not punish them. Joseon was too weak to go after the criminals directly. Swallowing sadness and rage, Japan's wrongdoings were swept under the rug. In order to escape Japan's continuing threats, Gojong and the Crown Prince eventually sought refuge at the Russian Legation. In history, this is known as the Agwan Pachon. After staying at the Russian Legation for a year, Gojong returned to Toksugung Palace. And the Korean Empire's efforts to accelerate reforms increased. However, more was needed to stop the historic wheels in motion. Both Russia and Japan were on the brink of war, trying to put the Korean Empire in their grasp. 1904. The Russo-Japanese War's fight over the Korean Peninsula began at the Amnok River and Chemulpo. The two-year battle ended with a win for Japan. In 1905, at the end of the Russo-Japanese War. At that time, efforts to ward off Japan were taking place in America. The Korean Empire sent a secret envoy to the U.S. Lee Seung-man, who was sent as a secret envoy, met with President Roosevelt and sought cooperation regarding the legitimacy of Korean Empire's independence. While hoping for an amicable response, the reality was harsh.
Roosevelt saw the Japanese as a force for modernity in Asia, and he welcomed the Japanese victory over the Russians in 1905. And in fact, he brokered the peace at the Treaty of Portsmouth in New Hampshire, which settled the Russo-Japanese War. And he thought that the Japanese should be encouraged to have an influence in Korea, and that they would bring positive changes to Korea. The world at that time was seen by many people as a global struggle for survival. Only the stronger races or the stronger nations would win, and those who were weaker and backwards would be defeated. Roosevelt saw Japan as one of the rising strong powers. There was a secret agreement between Theodore Roosevelt, Secretary of War William Howard Taft, and the Japanese Prime Minister Katsura, signed in Tokyo in the summer of 1905. The Taft-Katsura agreement essentially said that the U.S. would allow Japan to have power in Korea if Japan left the U.S. alone in the Philippines, which was its colony in Asia. So it was a quid pro quo, and that paved the way for Japanese protectorate over Korea and then its annexation of Korea as a colony in 1910.
No one wanted to protect a small and weak nation. The Portsmouth Treaty promised Japan control over the Korean peninsula. Jungmyeong-jeon, the Royal Library, was once called Suok-hun. This place that Gojong used as a banquet hall and received diplomatic guests became the tragic stage where the Protectorate Treaty of Japan, the Ulsa-Nugyak, took place. Ito Hirobumi signed the treaty with the 5 Ulsa enemies while ignoring the emperor's opposition, thus depriving the Korean Empire of diplomacy. Yet Koreans did not bend. They continued to resist. On the Korean peninsula and abroad, efforts to reclaim their country continued. A prime example took place in San Francisco. when pro-Japanese Stevenson, who pushed for Japanese colonization of Korea, was shot. Chang In-hwan and Chun Myung-woon were patriots. This was the beginning. Efforts of the Korean democratic movement were on fire.
Racial discrimination was rampant. You couldn't imagine in today's term. They could not go to barber shop unless barber shop is one owned by Chinese or Filipinos. They could not shop at the whites' penny or May stores, department store, which was just a popular store, but they kept the Asians and colored people from shopping there. Grocery also, only Chinese grocery they could go. Theater, only colored section only. And that, one thing that gave them the meaning to life, so to say, was to fight for their homeland's independence.
However, the Korean Empire's situation weakened, and Japan was hijacking its sovereignty. This time as well, without the emperor's authority, entered into the Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty. A treaty signed with the name of Sunjong, yet the handwriting was not that of Sunjong. According to international law, a null, fake treaty.
1910년에 한일 병합 조약을 이뤘어요. 한일 병합 조약 제1조에 이런 말이 나옵니다. 한국 황제는 한국 전부에 관한 일체의 통치권을 완전하고도 영구히 일본국 황제 폐하에게 양여함. 양여란 말이 나와요. 양여함. 양여한다, 양도한다 똑같은 말입니다. 아시겠어요? 양여함 이렇게 나와요. 또 제2조 이렇게 나와요. 일본국 황제는 한국 황제의 양여를 승낙하고 또 한국 전부를 일본 제국의 병합함을 승낙함 이렇게 나와요. 세상에 이런 법이 어딨습니까? 세상에 삼천리 강토를 통째로 말이지 양여한다 이거예요. 무슨 물건도 아니고 말이지. 양여 이렇게 이제 한일 병합 조약에도 양여라는 말이 나옵니다. 이와 마찬가지로 조선 한국 공사관도 양도한다, 양여한다, 똑같은 그 문구예요.
As the country was taken, the fate of the legation also changed. The legation was bought for $25,000 with the private funds of the emperor. With the fall of the Korean Empire, the building was forcibly sold to the Japanese envoy Uchida for $5. And right away, the Japanese sold it to an American for $10. The legation building was no longer part of Joseon, nor the Korean Empire. Thus, a prolonged separation began. Many years passed before getting it back into Korean hands. The movement to help recover sovereignty was now moved to the West Coast. The independence movement was especially active in San Francisco. In 1913, a group called Hungsadan was formed and centered around a young man named Ahn Chang-ho. Hungsadan was a group to protect the rights and interests of Korean citizens, support social activities while gaining strength for independence. The response was overwhelming. Most were poor students or immigrants who signed labor contracts. Yet, they banded together with a goal to strengthen their homeland in a show of respect.
When they left Korea between 1903 and 1905, they left Korea as Korean citizens, Korean subjects of Korean Kingdom, with a passport issued by Korean Kingdom. But by the end of 1910, which means to most of them 7-8 years later, Korea as a such was wiped off from the map, gone. What happened? Japanese took over Korea, so Japanese made Korea part of Japan. So there's no longer Korea. That's called Korean annexation into Japan. So the passport they brought with them was no longer useful. Nobody recognized as a country. In fact, the Japanese were so diligent in identifying all Korean immigrants and then sent them letter. If you bring your old passport, we will issue you in place Japanese passport, because you now became Japanese, not Korean. Korean accession no longer exists. And those immigrants who came here, and they thought that was most insulting, frustrating, disappointing, and of course they did not go to Japanese consulate or embassy to exchange their old Korean passport for Japanese passport. There were occasionally some who did it, and he was found to have done, he was branded as a traitor, and the Korean community really shunned them away and so on.
They were not simply yearning for it. Strong men worked in coal mines or built the railroad to make money. For Koreans used to farming, they left San Francisco to settle in places like Ridley and Dinuba. As the Korean American community grew, so did efforts for the independence movement. They found a way to help their motherland from America. Mainly, the support of the Independence Fund. The first-generation Koreans did not forget their heritage, and despite their difficult circumstances, saved money to send to the provisional government. They felt compelled to help. Congregating at churches, making efforts to never forget their identity. In order to deliver the funds collected for the independence movement to the provisional government. There are traces of independence fighters here. Upon hearing about the March 1st independence movement in 1919 in their homeland, the immigrants held a similar movement in the U.S. the following year.
They expressed their passion for homeland by celebrating March 1st Independence Day. And you heard about March 1st and how that March 1st, 1919 is equivalent to July 4th, Independence Day in the United States. And that's the day that Koreans dared in mass to stand up to Japanese and demanding them to leave the country. And this mass demonstration on March 1st actually it's not just started March 1st and ended March 1st. It lasted throughout the whole year, costing many lives and deaths and injuries. And so immigrants here in the United States and elsewhere, providing them the support with the money, with letters and care and so on, even though they were poor.
Many decades passed, and the Second World War broke out. Korean Americans who wanted to fight against Japan wanted to enlist.
어떤 분이 저희 노던 캘리포니아 즉 말하자면 저쪽 여기서 좀 더 북쪽으로 가서 어떤 한국 사람이 저희 큰 농장을 가지고 있는데 거기서 농사가 잘 돼서 그때 벼농사를 했는데 상당히 이익을 봤대요. 그래서 그 사람을 중심으로 해서 이제 비행기 조종사 훈련도 하고 그래서 이제 미국 군에 이제 편입해가지고서 같이 일본하고 싸우는데 이제 나가서 싸우자 그런 액티비티도 했다고 그래요. 그 후에 다 이제 전쟁도 끝나고 이제 그러니까니 다 다 그냥 무효로 돌아가고 말았죠. 근데 그런 액티비티까지 했다고 그래요. 그만큼 그 애국심들을 많이 냈었죠.
The war ended with the Japanese surrendering. And Korea became independent. A new country, the Republic of Korea, was formed and established diplomatic relations with the U.S. And in 1953, the first consulate was purchased by the Korean government in San Francisco. 60 years passed.
우리 대한민국 정부가 건물을 구입한 지 60년이 지난 그 오랜 역사를 자랑하는 저희 샌프란시스코 총영사관에 지난 1년여에 걸친 공사가 성공적으로 마무리된 것을 우리 지역, 우리 동포사회를 대표하시는 여러분들 모시고 자축하는 그런 기쁜 자리가 되겠습니다.
San Francisco, where the first Koreans immigrated and overseas Koreans fought for independence. What kind of significance does this hold for Koreans?
San Francisco is basically an area where the Korean immigration into the United States began at the early 20th century, and also it's a place where a lot of Korean people who are campaigning for the Korean independence from Japanese colonial rule overseas. So it has very important historical meaning in this place. That's why the Korean government decided to establish the consulate here in San Francisco.
Then what happened to the very first legation of the Korean Empire? 1982. About 100 years after establishing ties between Korea and the U.S., the search for the legation was on.
장소는 워싱턴 등기소입니다. 거기에 세 건의 문서를 발견하게 된 것입니다. 왜 그렇게 했느냐 하면은 나는 반드시 조선 공사관이 있으면은 어디엔가 그 부동산 문서가 있을 것이다. 이렇게 추적을 했습니다. 추적을 해서 결국은 그 사실을 알고 그 세 건의 문서를 얻게 된 것입니다.
In 1983, at the National Archives in Washington, he found 3 documents. A document showing King Gojong's purchase of the property, a June 1910 document showing the sale of the building for merely $5 to the Japanese envoy, and a document dated that August showing the envoy's sale of the property for $10.
그 문서에 나옵니다. 이제 빼앗은 것이다, 강탈한 것이다. 그렇게 생각을 하고 이 빼앗긴 주권을 되찾자 하는 사명감을 가지고 내가 추진을 했습니다. 그래서 내가 이제 이 공사관을 회수하는 캠페인을 벌였습니다.
Professor Kim Won-mo wanted to help Korea reclaim the stolen legation by proving that the signatures used were forged. But his efforts were unsuccessful. And time passed. While there were attempts to purchase the building, until recently, the legation building was not returned to Koreans.
기금 문제 있어가지고 아직까지 우리가 그 기금이나 성금을 모으는 과정이 그렇게 전문적이지 않았었고, 그리고 두 번째로는 그 홍보 부족에서 이것이 얼마나 절실하게 우리한테 필요한 것인가를 제대로 알리지 않았다는 그 두 가지 문제점이 있었다라고 생각됩니다.
Many people participated in reclaiming the legation building. Of the many was one very special person, the last princess of the Korean Empire, Miss Lee Hae-kyung. Miss Lee went to live in America in 1953 and settled in New York City.
How are you? So good to see you. How have you been?
Yes.
Oh, you're looking terrific. Oh, have you been to Korea?
Yes,
Okay.
I was there last October.
Okay. So I'll be able to
Yes,
understand
you
it.
will see.
Very, very good.
Okay.
And how long? When is that going to be available?
She worked as a librarian here at Columbia University for 27 years before retiring. Her father was the crown prince of the Korean Empire, Emperor Gojong's second son from his concubine. Prince Eui-chin had many wives and children. Yi's mother was one of them, but she grew up in the palace as the daughter of the king's first wife. But the life of fallen royalty is not so comfortable.
Well, those days, nobody was recognizing the royal family, or maybe it's not even mentioned. I'm a member of the royal family, and a lot of people those days was hostile to our family because they were educated, that Japanese educated them that our family was so weak.
Leaving the motherland. But as far as America was, she was reunited with her father and grandfather.
Anything about your grandfather?
This is all about my grandfather's. So I was looking because this is 1906. My father came back from America. So I was trying to see if anything there.
While working at the library, organizing materials regarding Korea, she discovered an incredible secret about her father. That he lived in the fast lane and participated in the independence movement.
I think that's my fate, that I got the job in this library and start working for Korean section. So I was so excited, and especially when I read about my father. I didn't know what my father was doing, and I knew he was a prince, but to me, it seems that he's doing nothing and just going around and having fun. That's what I thought. But after I read a lot of books about him, here and there, his main goal was trying to have a Korea independent. He was fighting for the independence for Korea. One day, somebody from Washington D.C. called me, and he told me there was a legation building in Washington D.C. and the owner is trying to sell that building. And he told me about all the history, you know, how my grandfather bought that building.
So she helmed the efforts to reclaim the legation building and began to ask for assistance from various places. discovering the truth that her father had hidden long ago, even to his children, wanting to share it with the world. She felt it was now time to go public with her father and grandfather's true intent. She let mainstream America know about the existence of the Legation building. As a result, the U.S. Congress, Korean American organizations, cultural foundations, and many people's collective efforts began. There were numerous difficulties regarding reclaiming the Legation building. From opinions about taking this issue to court since it was forcibly taken, to convincing the longtime owner residents who did not wish to leave. Yet at the same time, there was much help given too.
It looked to me like that move was not in fact going to occur. And I knew that legally it was not probably going to be successful either. But I also wanted the government of Korea to understand that they were not alone. And that's when I thought it was extremely important to begin to engage other government officials here in the United States, particularly many of my former colleagues in the Congress, and to show that there was an interest by every person who wants to believe in historical preservation that we could do things together.
In 2012, after 102 years, the Legation has finally returned to Korea.
아마 이제 제대로 우리 문화 공간으로 활용을 할 때는 많은 우리 교민들뿐만 아니라 워싱턴을 방문하는 우리 한국인들 그런 감정을 다 느끼면서 나라를 굳건히 지켜야 되겠다고 하는 역사의 교육 장소로 크게 잘 활용될 거예요. 특히 청소년들 또 미국에서 태어난 2세, 3세들에게도 이제는 우리도 자랑스러운 한국으로 한국인 자리매김하는 데서 큰 역할을 했다고 해요. 그리고
When its existence was rediscovered, in the beginning the building was something to be seen only from afar.
I'm very happy this happened, and I have been wondering for a long time that when we can have this building back.
The long wait has ended. Now, Miss Lee Hae-kyung stands here to meet her grandfather's legacy.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome to Logan Circle.
Hello.
Hello.
It's nice to see you.
Welcome.
Finally, I meet you, and both of you, I'm just so glad. Wow, beautiful. And you kept this place so beautiful, too.
Thank you.
This is where the diplomat stayed for helping the future of the Korean Empire. While studying abroad in America, her father, Prince Uichun, often stayed here as well.
I just told you.
That's probably the way your father saw it.
Yes, he must be. And he stayed here. It's not much different.
No,
It's
as they say, the bones are the same.
yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
This is beautiful.
I think it's safe to say that we learned of it from the beginning. The original owner provided pictures of the interior of the house, which we've also included in some materials that the embassy now has published. And it shows the Korean flag as it was displayed in the hallway in 1891.
We saw a Korean man standing on the corner across the street. And we went and came back again, and he was still there. And so actually my husband went to speak with him, and he was the the grandson of the first ambassador who lived in this house. So we invited him in, and we had tea right here. And he walked around the house with his hands folded in such reverence that it was clear to me that there was a very spiritual and an emotional connection that he had with this place.
That white, and they used to have wallpaper. And they're in one of the articles that we saw, ambassador at the time when the
museum space.
They had this kind of space. Wow.
Even though a long time has passed, it has been preserved well. Being returned in such good condition is like a miracle.
So we decided that it was probably the best thing to have it be returned to Korea.
Thank you. I'm so glad it happened. Okay, thank you again. Sure. Okay, bye.
Bye.
I think it's very hard to keep the house that way for a long, long time, 30 years.
The fall of the Korean Empire as it heartbreakingly struggled to survive. Scars remain, even after a century has passed. The situation around the Korean Peninsula is similar to that period in time, which is why they say to remember the lessons of history.